for Medicare and Medicaid. They are the most vulnerable in our society. Those individuals and the programs that they rely on, paid for by taxpayers, deserve better. We have the opportunity now to ensure they get it. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor.
Thank you.
Madam President.
The senator from Alabama.
Madam President, I was pleased that earlier today the Senate voted to move forward with the China currency legislation that has been worked on for so many years by Senator Schumer, Senator Lindsey Graham, and I'm pleased to join with them. I voted for similar legislation in 2005. I would just say a couple of things as our members evaluate where they are and what they will do on final passage. I believe in trade. I'm not sure I want to use the phrase free trade anymore. I believe in good trade, and most trade is good trade. And countries do need to compete with the production in other countries. And if you have a trading partner, normally both partners to a relationship benefit. If the one partner in a treaty, a trade, or in a business relationship, if one party to that relationship is being damaged by that relationship, then they have to confront the problem and fix it or withdraw from the relationship. That's just the way life is. And I tease some of my free market friends, and I have a lot of them, that on trade issues, they're religious about it. It's a religion with them. They don't want to analyze whether or not the trading agreement advantages the United States or the other party. They just want to say it's a trade agreement, be for it. Anything that promotes trade is good. Peace will break out in the world, cancer will be cured, and just have trade. Well, that's not quite what I think conservatives believe. I'm a conservative, and a conservative believes in reality. Conservatism is a cast of mind, not an ideology. It's an approach to complex issues, as my friend Bob Terrell at the American Spectator says. It's an approach to issues. It's a cast of mind. So how do you approach this matter? We're getting hurt in this relationship. Every editorial I've seen, even those groups who are specifically advocating for against this legislation, they contend and acknowledge that the United States is being disadvantaged by this currency manipulation. All acknowledge that. And when you acknowledge that, you acknowledge that we are losing jobs and losing manufacturing in this country as a result not of competition, but of unfair competition. And let's be in contact with reality. The People's Republic of China is state-dominated. Those companies are not free to do as they normally would in the United States. It's a state-dominated thing, and every agenda that's carried out by China, by their companies even, tends to be driven by expanding the national interest of China. That's the way they think, and that's the way they operate. Their theory of trade is mercantilist. They believe in maximizing their exports, minimizing their imports, accumulating wealth. Some of our friends here say, oh, it's all right. The products that sold at Walmart, they're from China, all right. Yes, we closed a factory in the United States, but don't worry, Mother can buy her sneakers or her children's clothes cheaper because it's imported. Don't worry about it. And manufacturing is really not that important, they've told us, and you've seen that in the writings around the nation from some of our great economic minds. But I don't believe that's true. I do not believe this nation can be a strong, vibrant force in the world without a manufacturing sector. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Schultz, the CEO of ThyssenKrupp Steel Company in Germany. He was investing in my home state of Alabama. He said publicly and to me privately with great passion. He just retired. He's at 70, very impressive man. And he said, you've got to have a renaissance of manufacturing. He said Germany was criticized by attempting to hold on to its manufacturing base in Europe, saying they were not part of the modern economy, the service economy. But he said we did more than most of the Europeans to maintain our manufacturing base, and we're now the healthiest economy in Europe. You have to have a manufacturing base. Wealth is sent abroad every time you purchase imported products. The deficit with China last year was $273 billion. This year it will be the largest in history, $300 billion. There's never been a trading relationship resulting in deficits in the history of the world as large as those. China is the second largest economy in the world. China is growing rapidly. It's been doing this for a decade. And let me say, I celebrate prosperity in China. I'd like to see prosperity in all of the nations of the world, and they would benefit the United States, not harm us if China is prosperous. But if their prosperity is driven by disadvantaging the United States to their advantage, as the currency process does, then that's a different story. It's not a fair competition, and it's not helpful to the United States. So we're told that this won't hurt us, that we can move to a service economy, that we don't have to have manufacturing, and the doctrine of comparative advantage is such that if you can manufacture a product cheaper in China, well, so be it. We just put the American businesses out of business. Let them close the door. Well, there are two reasons. As a conservative, I'm not comfortable with that. First, this creates too rapid a dislocation in our economy, causing too much damage societally from rapid unemployment and closing of manufacturing in our country. Number two is we now know with certainty that the manipulation of currency, the 30%, 25% difference, is unfairly competing with American business, unfairly closing businesses down. And we have a chance to rebound, I am convinced, in manufacturing. China's salaries are going up. Salaries around the world are going up. China's utilities and energy costs are higher than ours. Now, their advantages are not so great as they were a few years ago. And we're becoming more sophisticated. Our businesses are lean and competitive now. And I just think we have a real chance to get back into the game, but not if we have a 25 to 30% currency, where when we sell a product to China, it costs 25% more than the competing Chinese production would. And when they sell to our company, they have a 25% country, they have a 25% advantage over our manufacturers. This is when margins are as close as they are in the world economy today, that's too large. Any unfairness is too large. So I would contend that we have to act. Secondly, there is damage being done to the middle class in our country. And a large part of it is arising out of unfair trade practices. And we've got to be aware that millions of Americans are hurting. Maybe their wife, maybe their husband has lost their job and now unemployed. Families are struggling to get by. Wages are not going up. In fact, wages have trended down just a little bit. Unemployment is not going down. It's maybe going up now for the last several months. And inflation is on the scene, 2–3% inflation. So if the wages aren't going up, the number of people aren't going up, and then you get into a situation in which you can't see economic growth occur. There's just not extra money to go to the store and market to buy things. As one businessman told me, one of the great marketing chains in the United States, Walmart, one of their leaders said people just don't have the money to come to the store to buy anything. If you don't have a job, you don't have the money to buy anything. So this is a serious economic problem we're in. I have come to the conclusion we can no longer borrow money to spend today to try to create a sugar high and jumpstart our economy. That didn't work before. We don't have the money. The debt is already too great. We need to look for ways to create American jobs now without costing the United States Treasury or raising taxes on an already weak economy. This is one of those things. Senator Schumer, Senator Brown, Senator Graham, and I, we agree in a bipartisan way that this is a way to create jobs without harming our economy, without raising the debt of America. A bipartisan act to create greater employment by simply eliminating an unfairness that's hammering American manufacturers and American workers. Oh, they say if you insist on this, China will be offended. Well, first, China's a great nation. They have the second largest economy in the whole world. They are bellicose. They attack us aggressively. We don't go hide under the table when China says something bad about the United States, do we? And neither are they going to hide under the table if the United States Senate and the United States Congress says, you got to get your currency correct. Great nations don't wither and crawl away. But I was looking at the article in Forbes magazine by Mr. Gordon Chang, who talked about this question. My friend Chris Cicola, at the president of Club for Growth, who opposes this legislation, said this. What do they say to arguments that starting a trade war with China would kill jobs, not create them? That's what Mr. Cicola was saying. If you start a trade war, you're going to lose jobs. Well, first of all, Mr. Cicola's hands are not so clean in this issue. When he was in the House of Representatives a few years ago, he introduced a bill in the House, the China Act, that would have imposed similar tariffs on China if it tried to manipulate its currency, according to his press release at the time. I guess he's changed his mind. We all have a right to change our mind. But I would just say that I'm not too impressed with that argument, and would note that Mr. Chang, in his comments about it, made a very good point. Writing in Forbes, he says, Mr. Cicola is correct that a trade war with China would kill jobs. A trade war which will not occur, in my opinion. But if you had a trade war, it would hurt jobs in the United States. But he says, quote, most of them would be in China, and that's absolutely so. How do we know this, he asked. Last year, the United States ran a deficit in trade and goods with that country of $273.1 billion in trade wars. It's the surplus country, China, the countries that depend on exports that get hurt the most. Americans know this because we were the powerhouse exporter in the 1930s when the Depression hit, and the trade froze after tariffs and other actions, and we were hurt the most because we were exporting goods. And he goes on to note how large China's economy is in its dependence on exports to the United States. So he says this is a pretty good indication that Beijing, though it will undoubtedly complain, might engage in minor retaliation, but will not escalate the fight. China cannot afford more unemployment, close quote, said Mr. Chang. And he quotes Premier Wen Jiabao as saying, well, if you change this currency, countless Chinese workers would become unemployed, close quote. Now, what does that say? The Premier of China is saying that if we have a fair currency rate, Chinese would lose jobs. Well, somebody's going to gain those jobs. Maybe it's in Dayton. Maybe it's in Birmingham. Maybe it's in Mobile. So, as Mr. Chang says, this puts it on the line. He's seeking to put American workers on the bread line, not Chinese workers on the bread line. And as Donald Trump said, as he tweeted last week, quote, China is stealing our jobs, close quote. So I'm not here trying to condemn China. I'm here saying that we failed to aggressively defend our legitimate national interest. We need to do that. I believe this legislation begins us in that path. I believe in trade. I'll support the Colombian trade bill. I expect to. As that comes forward, I think it serves our national interest. The Panamanian trade bill, I believe, serves our national interest and will help us be more profitable. And I believe the trade agreement that we have negotiated with South Korea is also in our national interest and will help us. But this deal needs to be fixed. It's time to stop it. It's gone on too long. It's great to see my colleague, Senator Brown, here. I know he'll be ready to talk as we move forward to final passage. And let me congratulate Senator Sherrod Brown and Senator Schumer and others who've worked on the bill. I believe it's a reasonable piece of legislation, provides exits if something dangerous were to occur, gives discretion to the President to delay, even stop actions that might occur under this process if it's damaging to the United States, and gives Congress a chance to be involved in that process. It's the right way to do it, I think. Maybe somebody's got some better ideas and we can improve the bill, but fundamentally I think it's a good piece of legislation. It will do the job, and I'm proud to be a part of this bipartisan effort that has moved legislation that will help create American jobs without expanding our debt. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate very much Senator Sessions' comments, and even more I appreciate his work on this legislation. He was one of the couple of real key players in this legislation passing, because he did such a good job of explaining to colleagues why this is a plus for American manufacturing and a plus for job growth in our country. And I think about his comments on the major opposition to this bill has been an accusation or a contention from opponents that whether there are some members of the Senate or House or some newspapers or some economists who say this would result in a trade war. And fundamentally, as Senator Sessions' comments indicate, fundamentally, the Chinese are not going to initiate a trade war against their largest customer. I mean, we buy 1/3 of Chinese exports. Of all the hundreds of billions of dollars of exports they do around the world, 1/3 of them come to the United States of America. And just pretend you're in business for yourself and you have a customer that buys 1/3 of your products, and they do something to make you mad. You're going to declare war on them? No, you're going to sit down and figure out how do we make this work. And, you know, you can never predict the future on darn near anything, but with certainty, you know, whether it's the Minnesota Twins finishing in last place this year, Madam President, what I never would have predicted because they were a good team in previous years, or whether it's trade law or the economy. But you knew that as soon as we passed this, two things would happen. One is that the Chinese, in this case it was the People's Bank of China, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I think, and the Ministry of Commerce, would immediately squawk trade war, trade war, trade war. Unfortunately, some others in this body and in newspapers mimicked that, but it wasn't going to result in that. And the other thing you can pretty certainly predict based on history is the Chinese, after this strong vote, which we got thanks in large part to Senator Sessions of 62 votes earlier today, that they're probably going to let their currency appreciate a little bit because they know that we're calling their bluff. But for sure, it doesn't make sense for them to initiate trade war. They'll fight on some individual issues. They may fight on some products that were made in Ohio or Alabama and fight back one issue at a time, and we'll go to the World Trade, we'll go to the WTO, the World Trade Organization, and we'll have at it in a legal way, and we'll win most of them because they're game in the system. We might lose one or two, one of our manufacturers, but we know in the end it'll work out. And that's why Senator Sessions is dead right here, that this is the right thing, that it's going to create jobs in our country. We've seen the trade deficit increase and increase. It's almost 3 times what it was when this happened 10 years, when this started 10 years ago. And we're going to be in a much better place, not tomorrow or the next day, but next year, if we can get this through the House of Representatives. I mean, I'm not assuming we'll pass it today. I think we will here. We get it to the House of Representatives. Overwhelming support, 60 Republican co-sponsors, 150 Democratic co-sponsors, something like that, will want to move this bill in the House. The President and Republican leadership in the House aren't quite where Senator Sessions and I are on this, but public pressure will get to them, and we expect this bill to get to the President's desk. I think he'll sign it in the end, and I think it'll be good for Alabama, good for Ohio, and good for the other 48 states. And American manufacturing is what built this country. You really only create wealth through mining and agriculture and manufacturing. And the presiding officer's home state of Minnesota has done all of those very well over the years. Mining, where she grew up, and agriculture, which is huge, why she's on the Agriculture Committee as I am. And manufacture, Minnesota has done a lot of manufacturing. In my home state of Ohio, we're 3rd in the country in manufacturing output, behind only Texas, twice our size, and California, 3 times our size. So we know how to make things in this country. We just want a level playing field to do it. So I thank the presiding officer. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
The senator from South Dakota is recognized. We are on a quorum call.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with and that I be able to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam President, I come to the floor today to talk about one of the dirty little secrets around here, and that is the ticking time bomb that is right under our noses, and that until recently had been virtually ignored until some recent activity in Congress and at the Department of Health and Human Services brought the program into the spotlight. That time bomb is the Class Act. It's a program that was created, a long-term care entitlement program created by the health care reform law. On Tuesday, the Wall Street Journal described the inclusion of the class program in the health care law as the definition of insanity. And, Madam President, I would ask unanimous consent that that article be included in the record.
Without objection, so ordered. It will be included.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, the editorial highlights a point that I've been making since I first offered an amendment to strip the class program from the health care reform bill back in December of 2009. The inclusion of the class program was perhaps one of the most brazen budget tricks used by the majority in the health care reform bill. And as the Wall Street Journal says, and I quote, "Class was added to the bill because it was among the budget gimmicks the Democrats needed to create the illusion that trillions of dollars of new spending would somehow reduce the deficit," end quote. Due to the 5-year vesting period required by the class program, premiums will be coming in long before benefits must be paid. That pot of money, somehow, is simultaneously used to reduce the deficit and pay for other programs within the health care reform law. When it is clear to Americans that the money is not there to pay benefits to beneficiaries, this administration will be long gone and taxpayers are going to be left holding the bag. It is at best disingenuous the way that Democrats have promised individuals who participate in the class program that their premiums paid into the class system will be available to pay out future benefits. Now, when I asked Secretary Sebelius about this program earlier this year in a Senate Finance Committee hearing, she called the program, and I quote, "totally unsustainable," end quote. But HHS continued to push forward toward implementation, asserting that they had the authority to make changes in the program. Now, given the inherent questions in the fiscal sustainability of the Class Act, I co-chaired a bicameral group of senators and representatives, along with Representative Rehberg and Representative Upton from the House of Representatives, that investigated the behind-the-scenes story of the Class Act. We released the findings of our investigation last month in a report entitled Class, the Untold Story. And I would also ask, Madam President, that this be submitted into the record. I'd ask unanimously.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam President. We found astonishing statements from within Health and Human Services, the Department of Health and Human Services, that show the lengths to which the administration and Democrats knew this program was on a crash course, but proceeded anyway. Statements like this program is, and I quote, "a recipe for disaster," end quote, with, and I quote, "terminal problems," end quote. The emails also show that the independent chief actuary for CMS sounded the first warning in May of 2009. The chief actuary is a nonpartisan official who estimates the long-term financial effects of current law and proposed legislation. And this was his estimate of this was in 2009. He wrote to the HHS officials, some of whom are working directly with the Senate Democrats, saying, and I quote, "At first glance, this proposal doesn't look workable," end quote. The chief actuary said a back-of-the-envelope analysis showed that the program would have to enroll more than 230 million people, more than the number of working adults in the United States, to be financially feasible. Now, a few months later, the chief actuary was more assertive in his comments. In July of 2009, after reviewing the latest information from Senate Democrats, he wrote HHS officials, and again, I quote, "36 years of actuarial experience lead me to believe that this program would collapse in short order and require significant federal subsidies to continue," end quote. Now, unfortunately, Democrats here in the Senate needed the political win more than they needed to hear the truth. And so they pushed forward, included the Class Act, based off illusory savings coming in the form of incoming premiums from the paychecks of hardworking Americans, incidentally, some of whom may never consent to program participation. Now, late last month, there was another interesting development that occurred. The actuary tasked with designing the class program announced that he was leaving his position at Health and Human Services and that the class office was closing. Now, HHS denied closing the class office and said that they're still evaluating this program. But in a blog post on healthcare.gov, the Health and Human Services Department, HHS, announced that they will be releasing a report on class sometime this month. I believe that this report will indicate that this program does not have the fiscal muster to move forward, but it is possible that HHS may try to hide that information. Madam President, if this Congress is truly concerned about long-term deficits, this program should be at the top of the list of programs to repeal. This program may not cost taxpayers money in the short term as the premiums are coming in, but eventually it will require an ongoing bailout from taxpayers to the tune of billions of dollars. Madam President, I hope that sometime in the days ahead, and I filed an amendment to the current legislation that's before us to repeal the Class Act, probably won't get a vote today, but I hope that the United States Senate will weigh in and exercise some common sense and do what we should have done a long time ago, and that is to strike and eliminate this program so that we don't deal with this massive time bomb that is ticking out there waiting for future generations of Americans who are going to be stuck with the huge deficits will occur when the inevitable happens. And that is only a matter of time. It's pretty clear from the, as I submitted, Madam President, from the statements that were made by the actuary at HHS, there were statements made by the Congressional Budget Office at the time. There's all kinds of anecdotal evidence out there. There's all kinds of empirical evidence out there that suggests this is a program which is headed for fiscal disaster. It should not have been included as a pay-for in the health reform bill. That is why it was included, because it showed some short-term revenues, but the long-term costs are like many of the programs that we've funded here in the past. They have a long tail on them, and the American taxpayer is going to be stuck on the hook for a long time into the future. And so I would hope that we will have the good sense here in the United States Senate to repeal this program before it becomes the fiscal nightmare and the fiscal disaster that I think everybody has predicted that it would be. Madam President, I yield the floor. Madam President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Madam President.
The senator from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you,
We
Madam
are in a
President.
quorum call.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask for unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to honor Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth, an American civil rights hero who lived much of his adult life in Cincinnati, who passed away this week at the age of 89. I come to the floor with support of a resolution with Senator Portman, my colleague from Cincinnati, where Reverend Shuttlesworth lived many years, and also from Senator Shelby and Senator Sessions, where both representing Alabama, where Reverend Shuttlesworth lived his earliest several decades and then the end of his life. Much is known about Reverend Shuttlesworth's life, the beatings and the bombings, the arrests and the protests. He was born in 1922 in Alabama. He was a truck driver who studied theology at night. He soon became an ordained minister in his 20s. By the 1950s and his 30s, he was the pastor of Bethel Baptist Church in Birmingham, the pulpit from which he became the powerful, fiery, outspoken leader against racial discrimination and racial injustice. When the Alabama NAACP was banned in the state, Reverend Shuttlesworth established the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Churches held weekly meetings. Membership grew month by month, in large part because of Reverend Shuttlesworth's leadership skills. And the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights became the mass movement for blacks in the South. He fought Birmingham's racism in the courtroom, bringing suits to desegregate public recreation facilities. He protested the segregation of buses in Birmingham. He was beaten with chains and brass knuckles when he tried to enroll his children in a Birmingham school, even though he, of course, was a taxpayer. He would lead Freedom Riders to Safety, a critical voice imploring Attorney General Robert Kennedy and President John F. Kennedy to get the federal government to show leadership as Freedom Riders were jailed and attacked. Reverend Shuttlesworth himself was often jailed. He later left bruised and bloodied from fire hoses and police dogs, the brutal force of Bull Connor's lynch mob, his life and his family threatened by Connor's ignorant hostility or indifference, more often his hostility. He said they would call me his words were, they would call me SOB and they didn't mean sweet old boy. First time I saw brass knuckles was when they struck me. They missed me with dynamite because God made me dynamite. And so his direct action campaign continued. He mobilized students to boycott merchants with Jim Crow signs in their storefronts. He worked and he marched with Dr. King, affiliating the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, organizing bus boycotts and sit-ins and marches and acts of civil disobedience. He persuaded Dr. King to bring the civil rights movement to Birmingham, where Dr. King would write his famous letter from a Birmingham jail. In the letter, Dr. King writes of the necessity of Reverend Shuttlesworth's direct action campaign, fighting, quote, broken promises and blasted hopes. In the word broken, the two words broken and blasted meant so much to them personally because both were attacked so frequently. September 1963, the 16th Street Baptist Church was bombed, murdering 4 little girls, and a movement's grief and responsive resiliency helped pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. By the next year, he helped organize the march from Selma to Montgomery across the Edmund Pettus Bridge to fight voting discrimination in Alabama and across the South, galvanizing meeting after meeting with his fiery words. He soon arrived in Cincinnati, coming across the Ohio River as pastor and entering the North as pastor of the great New Light Baptist Church in Evandale. He trained Freedom Riders in nearby Oxford, Ohio, at Western Campus for Women, now affiliated with now affiliated or absorbed by Miami of Ohio, one of our great state universities. He trained those Freedom Riders, thousands of activists who would travel south to register black voters. Reverend Shuttlesworth fought for racial equality in Cincinnati schools, in city council and police departments, empowering low-income families through education, jobs, and housing for decades to come. I would like to read from and ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the editorial from the Cincinnati Enquirer, Madam President, and to enter this into the record, the editorial from October 5th, 2011. If I could have a unanimous
Without
consent to enter
objection,
it.
so ordered.
And I would like to share a couple of words from the Cincinnati Enquirer. He once told, this is from the beautifully written Cincinnati Enquirer editorial about Reverend Shuttlesworth. He told the Tampa Tribune it helped to have, quote, a little divine insanity. That's when you're willing to suffer and die for something. And they also wrote, nowhere is his ultimate triumph more evident, and I'm reading from the Enquirer, than in the renaming of the Birmingham airport, the Birmingham Shuttlesworth International Airport, a public tribute in a city where once a KKK member who was a police officer warned him to get out of town as fast as he could. Needless to say, the airport was named after Reverend Shuttlesworth, not after the KKK police officer. It was an honor to get to know Reverend Shuttlesworth and to learn from him. In 1998, I first met this historic figure in the civil rights movement, unknown to far too many people, in Selma, Alabama, during a pilgrimage with Congressman John Lewis, who was beaten up perhaps more than anybody in the civil rights movement. And it was an opportunity to spend some time with Reverend Shuttlesworth in Selma in the late 1990s. I visited his church in 2006. I heard him preach, and then at his retirement party, a while after that, not too many years ago, I heard him preach again and got the chance to get a tour at his retirement party, a tour of the small museum in his modest church, celebrating his life, but more set up to honor and commemorate the civil rights movement in the most personal kind of way, and to describe, it's impossible for me really to describe the feelings I had as he talked to a small group, Connie and my wife and me, a small group of us, as we toured this very small museum in a room at the church, but it was just packed with all kinds of mementos and commemorations of the civil rights movement and of Reverend Shuttlesworth's fight in those days in Alabama. Through these pictures and his memory, you learn not just about a man's life, but our nation's history. Passage of our most basic civil rights laws would not have occurred without his vision and his fortitude. We honor his legacy and his passing. We also are charged with upholding a sacred duty to take his lead, and that's because progress in our nation's never easy. Passage of voting rights and civil rights wasn't the result of one man's great speech in Washington or one famous march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The fight for women's rights and fair pay and protections for the disabled, none of those fights were easy. Yet in the last few years, we celebrated the 90th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, the 75th anniversary of Social Security, the 45th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disability Act. What will we celebrate in 20 years or 45 years or 75 years from what we've done here this year? How will we show the march toward justice is the mark of our nation's progress? We do so by marching with his spirit rather than standing in his shadow. Dr. King said of Reverend Shuttlesworth, quote, he proved to his people that he would not ask anyone to go where he was not willing to lead. That's a testament to his courage. 4 years ago, then a candidate for president, Senator Obama escorted a wheelchair-bound Shuttlesworth across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma. It was symbolic. It showed yet again Reverend Shuttlesworth leading us across another bridge. On behalf of a grateful state, Ohio, and in partnership with Senator Portman, Senator Shelby from Ohio, Senator Shelby from Alabama, and Senator Sessions from Alabama, I offer my deepest condolences to the Shuttlesworth family and to all of his friends and to all of his loved ones. Madam President, I offer this resolution. I think we will be looking at it later today, offered by Senators Portman and Sessions and Shelby and myself, and I ask for passage later, but I thank the President.
Without objection, so ordered, and we will thank you.
Madam President.
Senator from California is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to speak on the Currency Exchange Rate Oversight Act of 2011. And before I get into the bill, I want to say that this is not an easy vote for me. It is a difficult vote because beginning in 1979, I developed a relationship as mayor of San Francisco with China. And over these 30-plus years, I have seen China make the greatest changes of virtually any large country in the world. And I know China has wanted to reach out, and the United States has reached out. And on the Pacific coast, we have developed a century of the Pacific, where trade long ago overtook the Atlantic sector. And this trade between Asia and this country is indeed large and prized. During that time, I've had occasion to have meetings with the former president of China, the former premier of China, foreign ministers, and the latest foreign minister on the subject of currency. And I have urged each to let the renminbi float freely. In every conversation, they have indicated that Beijing is aware of the situation and the need to allow the renminbi to respond to market forces. And there has been some progress. From July of 2005 to July of 2008, the renminbi appreciated by 21% against the dollar. And since 2007, it has risen by an additional 7%. But unfortunately, action on this matter has not been sufficient, and China continues to resist a free-floating currency. My last conversation with a major government official took place last Friday evening in San Francisco. On Saturday, I pulled out my binoculars, and our home is situated on a hill, and it overlooks San Francisco Bay. And I watched the big cargo ships pulling out of the Port of Oakland, going through the Golden Gate. And I watched 5 of them, and I saw that they were half-loaded. And half-loaded cargo ships leaving the ports of America and going to Asia, and particularly China, has become more and more a part of daily routine. Most are loaded with scrap paper, but the equal trade is really missing. It is not. We import huge amounts of goods from China, and the same amount, with exception of some high-value goods, really does not go back to China. So I believe that if we're going to have this great trading basin on the Pacific Ocean, everybody has to play by the same rules. In my view, this bill is not about putting sanctions on China. It is not about imposing retaliatory tariffs. It's about sending a clear message to Beijing that we're serious about the need to let the renminbi respond fully to market forces. Let me point out that China is not specifically mentioned in this bill. The aim is to address misaligned exchange rates whenever we find them. This does not talk about manipulation of rates. But the bill has 3 fundamental purposes. First, it requires Treasury to report to Congress which currencies are fundamentally misaligned, not manipulated, but misaligned, including those currencies that require priority action. Secondly, the legislation provides a mechanism for the Commerce Department, at the request of a United States industry, to investigate whether an undervalued currency constitutes a subsidy subject to retaliatory tariffs. And finally, the bill triggers certain penalties if a priority country fails to realign its currency immediately upon designation. Additional consequences take effect after 90 and 360 days, subject to a presidential waiver. Now, what does this all mean? What it means is that really for the first time, priority countries are going to be looked at to see that we're all playing by the same trading rules, and whether any currency is misaligned. If that currency, in fact, is misaligned, then the bill triggers a period of time to remedy that misalignment, and if it is not remedied, within 3 months. It provides additional action, and again, all of this is subject to a presidential waiver. So in effect, what you have is the Senate of the United States speaking out and saying enough is enough. The time has come to let the renminbi float free just as the dollar floats free. And we take the upside along with the downside. If that's the case, then you have an equal and fair trading community. If it is not the case, you have a downward sloping trading community. The penalties include a prohibition on OPEC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, loans, increasing anti-dumping duties on imports from countries with undervalued currencies, a prohibition on federal procurement, opposition to any new financing from multilateral banks. Now, Mr. President, there is little doubt that the renminbi is undervalued. The Chinese leadership understand this, the Chinese people understand it, and the American people understand it. In April 2011, in a study by William Klein and John Williamson at the Peterson Institute for International Economics, it was argued that the renminbi is undervalued by approximately 28.5%. Other studies provide different estimates, but the conclusion that the renminbi is undervalued is constant in virtually every study that has been done. This gives Chinese goods a steep advantage over United States goods. It results in a loss of United States jobs. And it results in my putting on my binoculars and watching huge cargo ships leave a large port of Oakland, going under the Golden Gate Bridge, only half full, and when it's half full, it's usually waste paper. You can only take so much of this, Mr. President. And in my own way, I've been importuning the Chinese for over a decade. They're always polite. They always say, yes, they understand, but they also say China has to take steps. China can take steps. Well, the United States is now at a pivotal point. In the state of California, our unemployment rate is over 12%. And well, the United States is now at a pivotal point. In the great state of California, our unemployment rate is over 12%. And the half-empty cargo ships have to be filled up if we're going to have a fair trading community. And as I look at it, letting the renminbi float free is really what is necessary to do this. In testimony before the Senate Banking Committee in September of 2010, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner argued this: the undervalued renminbi helps China's export sector and means imports are more expensive in China than they otherwise would be. It encourages outsourcing of production and jobs from the United States. And it makes it more difficult for goods and services produced by American workers to compete with Chinese-made goods and services in China, the United States, and third countries. Well, every economic report agrees with our Treasury Secretary's conclusion. History indicates that's correct. Just using one's eyes indicate that's happening. Indeed, cheaper Chinese goods lead to bigger trade deficits with the United States, and that leads to fewer United States jobs. Here's another report. 2.8 million jobs, of which 1.9 million were in manufacturing. And if you analyze the lost jobs over the last 10 years, we have lost 5 million of them in this country over the last 10 years. It's the largest job loss of all categories. And nothing makes for it. We've gained in education jobs, healthcare jobs, but they're minuscule in comparison with the loss of manufacturing jobs. The report also argued that this trade deficit has been compounded by China's decision to keep the renminbi artificially low, essentially subsidizing Chinese exports at the expense of their American competitors. Now, regardless of whether or not the number of job losses is as high as the Economic Policy Institute estimates, or as I have just said, at a time when we've got this national unemployment rate at almost 10% and 12%, we have to use every tool at our disposal to put Americans back to work. And that means, quite simply stated, that the United States Senate, I hope, will be saying that we can no longer afford to ignore the devastation of the manufacturing sector in this country. A July 2009 article from the Harvard Business Review by Gary Pisano and Willie Shih argues that the decline in manufacturing will negatively impact our status as a leader in innovation. And I agree that in order for the United States to address the ills and promote economic growth, we've got to reclaim our leadership in research, development, and high-tech manufacturing. But in order to do so, we have to address the undervaluation of the renminbi. A market-based exchange rate between the renminbi and the dollar isn't going to solve all our problems, and nobody should believe that it will. But it will help create a level playing field. And trading communities cannot long exist on an unlevel trading field. So this is very important for America at this time. In a sense, and I don't like to say this, but in a sense, the legislation is a shot across the bow. It gives the Treasury Department and the Commerce Department clear authority to take actions against undervalued currencies wherever they may occur, and particularly in high-priority currencies. But it's also important that this bill is not merely about imposing penalties. And it's very well drafted, in my view, and I read it cover to cover. It mandates consultations with priority countries, the International Monetary Fund, and key trading partners. In other words, it continues to place an emphasis on dialogue and diplomacy. The bill provides another tool for United States companies that have been affected by cheaper Chinese imports due to an undervalued renminbi. It makes it clear that Congress has the authority to investigate whether or not an undervalued currency is a subsidy subject to countervailing duties. And it provides two well-known methodologies to determine the value of the benefit conferred on exports by an undervalued currency. So let me be clear. This bill does not mandate any countervailing tariffs due to an undervalued currency. It simply restates that Commerce has the authority to investigate whether such duties are appropriate if a domestic company provides the proper documentation. So, Mr. President, over the past 30 years, in visit after visit, I have seen how dialogue and cooperation have solidified ties between the United States and America. And Sino-American cooperation is very important. I've watched the process becoming the foundation for what I believe is our most important bilateral relationship. Indeed, in my view, this relationship can positively impact the security and economic well-being of both countries. As such, when addressing disputes that may arise between Washington and Beijing, I believe it's in the interests of both nations to use diplomacy and negotiation to find common-sense solutions. Yet, on this matter, I believe the time has come. We are past the polite talks where people say, I realize, I know, I understand, and not much happens. And in the last 10 years, it looked as if China was going to take action, and then China has retrenched on that action. So I believe we must send a clear signal to China that it has to move faster to a market-based exchange rate. And I know China doesn't like this. I know it has serious concerns about the bill. I understand that many United States companies and national organizations that do business in China are concerned about the impact this bill will have on our bilateral economic relationship. But I also know that over the 20-year period that I have been following the currencies of both countries, the improvement is small, and the impact on the United States has been great. So as a friend of China and a strong supporter of United States-China ties, I hope this vote will demonstrate our deep concern. I hope it will give the administration the leverage it needs to encourage Beijing to work with us and our partners in the international community to bring the renminbi into alignment with market forces. I do not say this in a hostile way. I say it in friendship and with hope that there is a future where trading between China and the United States can be on equal terms. I also would like to salute the authors of this legislation because I think they have really done a very good job. Senator Brown, who's on the floor, Senator Schumer, Graham, and others have really put forward, I think, a carefully worded bill which carries with it the real opportunity for change between the trading relationships of our two great countries. So I thank them, I thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Mr. President, I note the absence